Yeah. Hey, everybody. Welcome to part 2 of episode 64 of the HooperCast. This is the continuation of our discussion of our favorite movies of 2014. Without further ado, here we go. Can I talk about Guardians of the Galaxy real quick, since we were touching on it earlier?
Sure. Is that on anybody else's list?
Nope.
No? Okay.
All right. Well, I will be brief. I was expecting this to be better than others had reviewed it as. Everyone was like, "Oh, it's so good," blah blah blah. And I think that's because they're James Gunn nerds. I'm not a fan of James Gunn. I'm not a fan of James Gunn. He's just a director to me.
It's just
So, and I think some people allowed their affection for him to carry over into their love of this film. And that's kind of what I like about all the movies on my list is they're not directed by people that I'm inherently fans of. Mm-hmm. So I didn't even heard of the guy who did Edge of Tomorrow and whatever. Yeah. So Guardians of the Galaxy was solid, I'll say. It's on my list. It's my number 5. I liked, the computer, the effects. It's so weird that I call that easy these days, but it's so common that it doesn't stick out to me as like, oh, wow. Because I've come to expect that. And it sucks if you're listening and you work for like ILM and you're like, do you know how fucking hard that is? Because it's like, I know it's incredibly difficult, but the problem is
BT Dubs, if you're listening and you do work for ILM, I want a job.
Yeah, we all want jobs, please. Yeah, so it's I understand that it's not easy to do, but it's so common that I can't help but sort of get jaded by it. I mentioned Doctor Who earlier, and I don't know if my brain does this or if it's my brain doing this responding to Marvel doing this, but whenever I watch a movie like Guardians of the Galaxy, I cannot help but pair it with the Doctor Who universe. The Doctor Who universe, by the way, is just the universe. It's not like it's just the concept of like millions of planets and millions of different species and stuff. I have to immediately lump it in there just to wrap my brain around why everyone speaks English, which is... By the way, James Gunn answered that question, and it was essentially that if you look at Peter Quill's mugshot in the movie, he's got... It mentions he has like a translator chip or something implant, which presumably everybody has in space so that they can communicate with each other, that's just a flash in the pan in the movie, but it's kind of nice that he thought of that and
I don't even remember
put it in there. Yeah, I didn't see it either, but I also realized like they're going to speak English because this would be a horrible movie if they didn't.
Right.
But on top of all that, like I liked Guardians of the Galaxy. It was tough for me to try and latch on to new characters again, but then again, Marvel had conditioned me to not worry about establishing characters, and it's good for them. It's good for me as a viewer to assess new characters that don't have a history with me. And they're all fine. Everyone did a good job. I mean, 2 of them are CG, so what am I supposed to say about them? I mean, that's it's tough to judge the movie. I just judge it on a basic scale. I can't judge it as a Marvel movie. I can't judge it as an action movie. It's just, it's solid, and it's good, and I like it. I'm sure it'll grow on me as other Marvel movies have with repeat viewings.
I thought the 2 CG characters were the best characters
part
in the movie.
Yeah, the best part. I agree. But like Bradley Cooper did a great job. I really loved the animation of Groot. I don't know if Vin Diesel did that great of a job. He said 3 fucking words. So, it's
4.
Yeah, 4. That's right. He did.
4.
Spoiler.
That was the quickest $1 million he's ever owned.
Yes.
Oh, dude, no joke. Like he shows up with all those like red carpets. He's wearing the I Am Groot T-shirt. I'm like, you did nothing.
Yeah. Congratulations, Vin Diesel.
Yeah, So, but anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is I feel like I'm not talking up the movie at all. Like I'm breaking it down. It was solid. It ended up as number 5 because I enjoyed watching it, but just most of what I enjoyed watching was action created in a computer. And I guess I'm mentioning that specifically because, I'm not watching compelling dialogue between tense characters and wondering what's going to happen next. I sort of figured, like, obviously they're all going to win. I don't quite know how. Once I figured out how this ties into the Marvel Universe with the Infinity Stones, I was like, okay, well, now I know where they stand in the overall story. So it's basically like, okay, how are they going to win? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And then, but I didn't feel connected or attached to any of the characters, except Rocket, actually. Rocket's the only character that I latched onto and was actually cared about.
Mm-hmm.
He was the most sympathetic character somehow. Mm-hmm. So,
no, I'd agree with that.
Bravo to everyone who was involved with that.
And Drax.
Yeah, Drax is all right. Drax kind of annoyed me. He was funny, and his sense of him not having a sense of figurative language at all, or figures of speech was funny. But I didn't really. He was just a guy who fought for me most of it. I don't know.
Yeah,
I felt the most for Rocket and Groot, I think.
Well, I'll tell you where I'm at on this movie and why it didn't make my top 10. It didn't make my top 10 for a couple of reasons that you mentioned. I think you're right. The characters are a little tough to latch onto. For me, I like Star-Lord fine. I like Chris Pratt a whole bunch.
Yeah,
and
Chris Pratt's inherently likable.
He really is. I mean, it's really hard to hate the guy.
Yeah. Even in Wanted, by the way, did you see that?
I did not.
He's shit. Well, never mind. He's James McAvoy's work buddy who's like doing his wife. I didn't realize that till the other day when I saw like a GIF of him getting punched in the face. I was like, oh my god, that guy was Chris Pratt, and I remember liking him. Like, you're supposed to hate this guy. Yeah. He's funny. So it's even when he's supposed to be a douchebag, like he's likable. He's likable.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Like you said, Rocket is easily the most complex and likable character of the film. For me, I actually don't like Groot at all, and the reason for that is because everybody else loves him so much or something. But I don't like him because I feel like he's a waste. Like, you could take out the film and it would be the same. You could take him out of the film and it would be the same film.
Essentially,
you just have to come up. You just have to come up with a new way for them to survive that thing at the end. But essentially, he doesn't do anything in the movie. He's not a character. He's just a set piece. He's just walking around the whole time. And Gamora, again, I just feel like she was wasted. And Drax, I don't care for at all, because even though he's called Drax the Destroyer or whatever he is, he doesn't destroy anything.
He kills like 4 people, maybe.
He's always getting beat up by everybody. And then Ronan, Ronan the Accuser, right? This huge villain that they're building up is nothing. Like, he's taken out because Chris Pratt dances at the end. It's the goofiest bullcrap I've ever seen. Yeah. And like I can let that go in the movie, but after the movie I'm like, do you realize that they solved the conflict by dancing for a half second? Like, that makes no sense to me.
That did make me cringe a lot.
And then they just grab a thing, and then the only way they explain this is, well, you're half another thing that we don't really get. Maybe that's why you could do the thing that you did at the end that we said couldn't be done.
Yeah.
And it just came across as lazy in hindsight. And so that drags it down for me. And Ronan's such a bland villain, I don't care for him at all.
Marvel has issues with that.
Yeah, this is true. But Thanos is so wasted too. Like all he does is just sit and then like talk, and then dude doesn't do anything. There's no connective tissue to the Marvel universe other than just him being there. And it's okay. So if we're supposed to assume that Thanos is out trying to collect these Infinity Stones, and he's just sitting there. And okay, we know that Loki had one and the Cosmic Cube was one, but Thanos is literally just sitting, then I don't care about him. Like, if he was up and doing stuff, then I'm going to care about his quest and be like, okay, dude's a threat. But if he's just sitting there, when he finally gets up and decides to beat the crap out of the Avengers, I'm like, why didn't you do that a while back? Like, this doesn't make any sense. And I don't know, maybe that's just me picking on him because I don't even like Thanos. I think he's a Darkseid clone and I hate him. But the point is,
good Lord.
It's just some fanboy bullcrap in my mind. But the fact is, Thanos did not come across as a threat in this film to me. And for somebody who they're building in to be like the big bad, for me to have seen him twice now and not be threatened by him in the slightest is a mistake. and then on top of all of that, like just the goofy kind of stuff, like with Space Merle. I hate Space Merle. Dude, like, dude just whistle. Did you know that whole scene where he's whistling and that arrow's flying all over the place? Like, all those dudes could have just shot him. Like, all he's doing is just whistling, and they're all just like, "What's happening?" And like when you watch that a second time. Like, my brother rented that movie, and I walk in on it, and I'm just watching Merle whistle, and all these guys, like, looking around. I'm like, nobody shot him? Like, it would literally take one bullet. And it's just goofy stuff like that, like the goofy whistling and then the goofy dancing, and then that saves the day. And I'm like, this is so weird to me. And, you know, I can let go all the nitpicks that people have, like, how did the Walkman still work? Like, does he have AA batteries in space, too? Like, all of that stuff, like, okay, yeah, I'll let all that go. Because it gives me a cool soundtrack to listen to, but why a big spaceship has a tape deck in the first place, I don't get. But the point is, like, on its basic levels, while it's a fun movie to watch, in hindsight, it is not very smart. And you have this whole wasted moment with the collector that doesn't even really make any sense. Like, nothing's gained from that scene, and then. You have Ronan, who you repeatedly tell me is a threat, but he never really does anything threatening. Mm-hmm. He's like, I'll remember killing you, Drax. I'm just going to dump you in some water and leave. I'm like, well, you didn't kill him. Like, be a threat for once. And it's just all of these things add up to me in hindsight, so I can't put it on my top 10 list because of that. But I will say that in the movie, while you're watching the movie, if you just watch it and try to enjoy it, it is a fun movie.
Yeah.
But in hindsight, there's just so many problems that I can't possibly put it on a top 10. And I probably couldn't put it in a top 15 because it's just got too much stupid junk happening.
Ronan had that same issue that the dark elf did in
Yes.
Thor 2.
Oh,
I don't
dude, no
remember his
kidding.
name. Oh, Malekith.
Malekith.
He was horrible.
He was. That was just terrible.
I know that,
you know,
there was more that was supposed to be happening. I remember, again, in the same Q&A, James Gunn had mentioned how there was supposed to be more with Ronan, and that I think, and I could tell by the way he was saying it and the things he said, that he kind of regrets not fleshing him out more or not leaving in the stuff he originally had for Ronan. Mm-hmm. And I think... Obviously, Thanos was the original villain of the film, and then they decided to make him villain by proxy. And I think that was a Marvel choice, and I kind of agree. Like, it's a catch-22 because Dustin, I know you say Thanos, you feel like is a weak villain, but would he have been a better villain than Ronan? Simply by being the big guy, like simply by being the actual boss, not the boss of the boss.
Well, see, but it is a catch-22 because if you have him be the main villain and he gets defeated in this movie, then how is he going to be a threat to the Avengers?
Or
we've already watched him be defeated.
Yeah.
So that's the problem.
Or you know the whole time that he doesn't get defeated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
it's true.
So that's the problem. But then the flip side of that is you do what he does in this, which is he just sits there and then he's not threatening. So when he finally gets up out of that stupid space chair and decides to beat the crap out of Tony Stark, I'm like, I have no idea what you're capable of, Thanos. Like, I don't know anything about you. I don't know how angry you are or what you're even doing. I know that vaguely you want some stones, but not enough to get out of your chair and get them. That's my problem.
He's super good at sitting, though.
If
there was a sitting contest, like him and Professor Xavier would be neck and neck for a while, but then he'd
they
still
need to
win.
remake that Jonah Hill movie, The Sitter, but just with Thanos.
He's looking for a handout.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people have problems with the villains in Winter Soldier too, but I was like, they're much more memorable to me than these villains in this one.
I agree. I think Robert Redford in Winter Soldier is one of the better villains, and then even Winter Soldier himself. I mean, even though he doesn't really do anything, I think he's an interesting character because he's a villain by manipulation.
Yeah.
And even visually, he's just much more interesting. The Ronan, I couldn't even tell you what he looked like. I can't even remember.
I watched it like an hour ago, so I could tell you. But otherwise, he's a guy in a hood.
White or blue?
He's blue.
Well, he's light blue with some dark blue stripes. He's like a space zebra.
To me, he's just Legolas's dad painted blue. Like I said, when you're in the movie, it's a fun movie. But when you look back on it and you realize all the dumb crap that's in it, that everyone says is like endearing and like charming and funny and unique, and it's like not really. I mean, you don't solve a conflict like, hey, I'm going to destroy the world by dancing, like, and then it still expect me to think that Star-Lord's a hero. Like, all he did is dance and then grab a thing. Ooh, big deal. And you don't even tell me why he can grab the thing that is ungrabbable. It's weird. I don't know.
Yeah.
And this again.
I liked it, but it didn't make my top 10.
Right.
So I get your
shut
points
up.
though.
I'll shut up. It's
no. Yeah. These are all valid criticisms of the movie. I mean, this is the time in this episode where we're essentially talking about movies that did not make everyone's list, and
sure.
So it's well,
but it's not a bad movie.
Yeah, it's not a bad movie, but it does have, like, if you really sit down and you try to assess how good of a film it is or how good of a piece of the puzzle it is, like, or just as a standalone film, like, there are several issues. Just as a fun movie, it's just fine. And
I'll say this too. This will be my last thing. To me, this was a lot better. Like the rebel kind of outlaw, misfit group was a lot better when Joss Whedon did it in Serenity.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's part of it too.
I did think of Serenity several times, even down to some of the ship designs.
Yeah.
I was like, that's all right. Let me talk about the 4 I don't have in common with you guys, just real quick. I'm going to rattle it off, okay?
Okay.
Just my honorable mentions, i.e. my my other half of my top 10. The Purge Anarchy missed my top 10 because it just got edged out by the others. But I will say, if you have not seen the Purge movies, they create a real interesting what-if scenario. And I think that's my favorite. I've said before numerous times, my favorite genre is speculative fiction. And I like a movie that takes a scenario that doesn't exist today and just it just essentially it barely tweaks reality. I like that. I don't like, I'm just fine with not a lot of new stuff happening at once. So the concept of the Purge movies is that once a year there is an event called the Purge. It's a 12-hour window where crime is legal and you're allowed to murder people, do whatever you want. And the whole reason is to release pent-up rage and that people are more productive. And it's sort of hinted at the end of the first movie that by characters and stuff and by pundits and other things that it's essentially just a tool to wipe out, poor people who can't afford to defend themselves and therefore make the economy run better. And it's a real interesting, that would work kind of a thing. So this one, and so the first movie takes place in Ethan Hawke's house. This one takes place on more of a citywide scale because there are characters who get trapped outside during the Purge, which doesn't happen in the first movie. So it's like, oh God, what do you do if you can't get home in time? And so there's tension there. There's new characters. The main big capable guy is Frank Grillo, who plays Crossbones in The Winter Soldier.
Yeah.
So he's fun to watch. He's prepared. He's got like an armored Camaro and shit. He's pretty sweet. So it's a fun movie. It explores a little bit more of what happens to because the first movie is like, well, these rich people have a really fortified house. They just have capable villains who want to get inside their house. This one's like, this is poor people who live in like apartments or their car breaks down. And it's peels a little bit more of the overall layer of the onion back to where you're seeing that, rich people are capturing poor people, and putting them essentially in like pens to hunt them for sport during the Purge, and like auctioning off and taking bets and shit, and it's real crazy. So I like the film, not because, and I had a little bit of a problem with this in terms, the same problem I had with, what's it called? The second Neil Blomkamp movie, Elysium, which is about like rich people are bad, poor people are heart of gold, and it's like, okay, I'm sick of seeing that because this is clearly like a liberal movie. However, I'm okay with seeing the whole, these rich people are horrible people, and these poor people are good people. I don't like the blanket statement, but I appreciate this is a terrible situation. I can't believe people are doing this kind of thing. And so I like the world building. I like watching this play out, and I sort of like seeing the rules bent just a tad to allow for these particular circumstances. Like I said, It's a harmony on reality, so it's a great movie. And now that I think about it, it probably should have been above Guardians of the Galaxy, But these are good movies to check out. So if you haven't seen The Purge or The Purge Anarchy, go see them. They're really good, and I really can't wait for the next one because, as I said in my original review of The Purge, this premise can outlast several movies.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's such a good concept.
It's a great concept, and it shouldn't die anytime soon. I think it should keep going. There's many more stories to tell with The Purge.
Yeah, if you can make like 18 Paranormal Activity movies, you can keep this one going.
The next one's John Wick. I won't talk as long about these next three as I did The Purge. I just really like The Purge. John Wick is a pretty generic action movie with Keanu Reeves. It's just good because it's a good return to the screen for him. We haven't seen him in a while do anything worthwhile, and it's good to see Keanu Reeves doing action again and really nothing else.
Right.
So good action film. It's essentially a revenge film. It's fun to watch. Good action, good fights, but pretty generic, but fun to watch. So rent it if you have a chance. Transcendence is not as bad as everybody said it was. It's essentially about a technology mogul who dies, and he gets his consciousness uploaded to the cloud, basically. And so the whole movie is about, is it his consciousness controlling this computer, or is it actually him? And it's fun to watch. It's not. I think it was reaching for more than it could actually grasp. But in terms of the, what would happen if a human could control the internet, essentially, it's pretty fun to watch in that way. It's don't put it on a pedestal. It's just like, what if you uploaded Johnny Depp to the internet? What would happen? And it's worth seeing. People wrote it off as like a piece of shit, and I think that's incredibly unfair. And then the last one is X-Men: Days of Future Past. I talked about why I liked this one in the original review. It's a solid movie as both an X-Men film and as an action film. It's good. I wanted more out of it than I got. I liked the Wolverine much better in terms of the amount of action and the amount of pacing. It's a really important film in the whole franchise in terms of resetting the chronology and fixing a bunch of stuff. So if you are a fan of the franchise, this is a must-see because it has gigantic impacts on the franchise going forward. I just wanted
and here's
more.
What I'll say to that point.
Yeah.
Is I'm not a fan of the franchise, but I actually kind of enjoyed this film.
It's a good film. If you're a fan of Wolverine, like I am, way more than the other X-Men, don't have your hopes up with his involvement because he's merely a conduit through which the story exists. He has one interesting fight, and it's right when he finishes traveling through time. He kills like 3 gangsters in a bedroom. And that's really the extent of badass Wolverine stuff. The rest of it is him.
He's naked at the time.
He's wearing pants.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
My God, is Hugh Jackman in shape? Holy crap! I'm just saying. I watched that recently, and I was like, "Wow!" That guy.
True.
Anyway, so it's a good film. It's solid. Much like these others, it's a solid film. But it didn't have everything I had hoped for. But as a whole, I mean, it's a good X-Men film. You have to remember that Wolverine is not the star of the X-Men movies. As much as Marvel and Fox want him to be, he's not. He isn't.
Yeah,
he's part of a puzzle.
True.
This was by far my favorite X-Men movie.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, what did I like?
I'm not a big fan. I'm not like Dustin. I'm not a big fan of the franchise either.
Wait, hold on.
I still haven't seen The Wolverine.
You mean the Wolverine? I believe. Well, X-Men
I haven't
movie
seen that
to
one.
me. To me, X-Men movie is any of them that have X-Men in the title, and so on that level, I like X2 the best. I like the scale that this is on, but I think I like X2 more. Now, as a movie that features an X-Men character, I think the Wolverine is by far the best.
Gotcha.
But I like Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. I like Wolverine. I like Hugh Jackman's muscles, and I like claws. So take that with a grain of salt if you want. But I think as a film, and both just as a coherent story, except for maybe the third act, the Wolverine is a marvelous film. No pun intended. But
I think
it's
I think Days of Future Past is better than it has any right to be. Going in, like I said, I don't really like the franchise, so I didn't expect much at all. But I enjoyed it. I had a good time with it, if only just to see, the original guys come back and watch things grow and change, even though I will say that the timelines don't make a lot of sense, even in this film. And like how the future became Tron, how did that happen? I don't know.
With like the monolithic ships.
Yeah, like everything became Tron, but like Hugh Jack, I mean,
That's true. I didn't think about that.
Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen are still, I don't know, like however many years older than they were in X3. I'm like, how did the future become Tron that fast?
How is Patrick Stewart alive?
Yeah,
Not really explained.
They don't really explain that.
Because he blew up.
See, I'm confused because the future almost reads as like a different future, like not the future of X-Men 3. This isn't a continuation of that.
They totally don't explain
a different reality. They don't even address it.
They blatantly do not address it.
This is like a different reality, but then it resets to like
it's more
a similar reality.
It's more that they recognize that it's been speculated on the internet how Xavier survived. Like if you watch the end of X3, like he puts his consciousness into some dude's head to address someone else. So it's the whole idea is he's alive, he's like Voldemort, he just doesn't have a body. But then he totally has a body, and it's just like, oh, hey, Professor. It's like, hey, what's up? Like, what?
Yeah.
What?
I've been chilling with Magneto.
Yeah, so, but I believe they decided that was a sin, a cinema sin, if you will, Dustin, worth accumulating because their overall goal with this film was, in fact, to, essentially erase X-Men 3.
Sure.
So they figured, well, why try to explain it when we're just going to negate it by the end of the movie?
Right.
So
and the other thing that bothers me a little bit, and I liked Quicksilver in this movie, but I always think it's weird every time when a character like Wolverine is like, oh, I know a guy. I'm like, well, how have we never seen this guy?
Yeah, exactly.
I've seen like 6 movies with you.
He lives
brother,
nearby
and you never
too.
mentioned this dude.
He lives in the DC area. Oh, well,
yeah,
that's great. That's good. That really helps our plans tremendously.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's like the Autobots in every Transformers movie. Like GM has a new car out, and they're like, oh,
nope, yep.
Where's this guy been?
Yeah, exactly. But no, it is like that. But things like that bother me, and I don't know. It's not a bad movie. It's not a bad movie by any means, but yeah.
John, I think you are next in terms of the rest of your movies.
All right. No one else saw Mockingjay, right?
I did. I saw it last night.
Oh, you did? Okay. Did you like it?
I did. I liked it a lot.
Yeah. I thought that was good. A lot of people are giving that movie shit, too, for saying this is like the first part of blah, 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 blah. And if that made sense. But you know the deal.
Yeah. And they're stretching.
Right. I didn't feel that way. I felt like this was kind of like Deathly Hallows 1. It was a lot more character and a lot slower, but they had to get a lot of that stuff out of the way first. So I really liked it. I thought it was good. Let me look.
I would say for Mockingjay Part 1, this is probably my favorite of the Hunger Games series.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I've had very few complaints about it. I thought that it stuck true to the book, obviously, for the good parts. There were things that were changed, but things that should have been changed for a film.
Sure.
Like Effie isn't in the book. I thought it worked really well. It had again, it was a movie that had a lot of important things to say, even about current issues, and the use of propaganda, and all that sort of stuff, and how that certain things are manipulated, and it worked really well on that level. So I'll go over all these other ones real quick too. The Grand Budapest Hotel. I've never seen a Wes Anderson movie all the way through.
Me neither.
And I watched this one and I thought it was quirky and had a very, very, very distinct visual style, and Ray Fiennes is great in it, and it was hilarious. You don't see movies like this. There's nothing else like it. It's extremely unique, and I thought it was really great. Dragon Ball Z: Battle of Gods. This was released in Japan in theaters, and it was one of like the biggest movies in Japan this year. And this was the first film, like, because there have been other Dragon Ball Z movies that they've released theatrically, and I'm not a fan of those really, but this one was kind of creatively led by Akira Toriyama, who did all the comics and all that. So there was a lot more story to this one. The characters were a lot more fluid in this one, and it wasn't formulaic like all the others. So it felt very Dragon Ball. It felt very real, and it was, it was great seeing all those characters again after X amount of years that they've been away. So that was great. Gone Girl. I saw this with you, Dustin.
We did.
I thought this was a really solid movie. And again, it was one of those ones where I don't know how it's going to end. It really kept me on my toes, and it was extremely suspenseful. I thought you had a couple of great performances in this one too, especially Rosamund Pike. She did a really great job as the crazy wife. And again, I love David Fincher, and I think whenever he shoots a movie, he shoots it really specific in a really specific way. And I thought he did a great job handling all this sort of stuff. And the soundtrack was brilliant, I thought, but it was a very subtle soundtrack, but in the parts where it needed to work, it worked really well. And again, that had a lot to say about media and how media. Yeah, exactly. And then the other one.
Let me tell you real quick before we get off the topic.
Okay.
Why that's not on my top 10, because it probably would be like 11 or 12. The reason what kept it from the top 10 was the ending, and I won't spoil it.
Okay.
But for me, it is a little unresolved.
Right.
And I don't know how I can really.
See why you feel that way.
Yeah, I can't really explain it without spoiling it, but essentially they've built these things up, these two parallel storylines to this point, and you're going to be on one side or the other, and I think you're probably supposed to be, siding with Ben Affleck,
right?
But I don't know, just the storyteller in me wants at least one of the two to be resolved, and I feel like it ends at a point where instead of ending with one or the other winning, they end in a stalemate.
Right.
And so to me, it feels a little unresolved for that reason.
They both
lose
for that
reason. In a sense, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but they both lose because they both neither one of them win.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So yeah. So for me, that's what keeps it from the top. But I still think it's a really, really well crafted film. Some really great performances and all of that stuff. But it's just that feeling of sort of unfinished business that
right.
That follows you in the days to come. But yeah, that's it.
And I get that. My number one was Interstellar.
Oh, we did not talk about this, did we?
This is your number one film?
It is.
Oh, excellent. Okay. Yes, we can talk about that.
I guess what I liked about this movie was, obviously I love, Christopher Nolan's never made a bad movie to me, so
right.
Going into it what to expect. And this film was just so big, and it was on such a grand scale. And again, I saw this one in IMAX, and but at the heart of it, it's centered by this emotional story between a father and daughter, and that's the whole motivation for these two characters the entire time. So it is this big movie, but it's really grounded in this relationship between these two characters. So, but at the same time, it offers this really interesting story, extremely original and imaginative as well. But it was, really just everything about this was just incredible. It was one of these. It was like 2001 to me. It was one of these movies where you're watching it and it's playing out on screen. It's just, I don't want to say mind blowing, but it was one of those things where I've never seen anything like this in a movie. Very rarely do I see anything like this in a movie.
It's epic.
Yeah, but I feel like calling it that isn't doing it justice. It's I don't know. It's just so grand. It's all encompassing, and it all ties together at the end, and but it's not to me. It's not just like here's a planet with waves as the planet, man. Like but it presents it in a way that's believable, and it presents science in a way that's believable, and they have these robot characters that have emotion, but they're believable as robots as well, and yeah, I mean, it was an emotional film too. Like the scene where Matthew McConaughey's leaving, driving away, and his daughter is, upset with him. I mean, that was one of the most emotional scenes I've seen this year. I mean, but you wouldn't expect it from the movie because all this, when you see the trailers, I mean, it's all this. I'm going into space,
big,
but and it is big, but it, again, it's kind of like, so many things are playing out at once. So I loved the score. I thought the visual effects were incredible. It's probably going to win for visual effects this year in the Oscars.
I'm sure.
A lot of miniatures and all that, so it all looked extremely authentic. It didn't look CG at all. So.
Well, if you will indulge me, I'll tell you why that's not on my top 10, but I do have it listed as an honorable mention.
I'm a little surprised it's not in your top 10, Dustin.
I was too. Here's why. I agree with the sentiment that Chris Nolan has never made a bad movie. This is my least favorite of his films.
Oh.
And I'll tell you why. The movie, the first act, is brilliant. The second act is really, really awesome, right? It's the third act that gets me. So the first act, you've got, it's very grounded. We haven't gone into space yet.
I've not seen it.
Okay,
so I'm not going to spoil it, but the first act is grounded. We haven't gone into space yet. We're dealing with human issues on a human scale, something that's not far off from where we are. Right. Very believable, very, very well performed. Then we reach sort of the second act, which is sort of, okay, here's a planet that is this way, or here's this little trial, here's this little trial, and like a true epic, like you'd have Ben-Hur or something where, okay, now we're chariot racing, or now we're doing this. You've got these little almost sections of set pieces, right? Mm-hmm. These sequences that blend together very well, and almost you could pull one out and it's a little short film. Because when they go to the wave planet, that's a very distinct location, a very distinct set of circumstances, a very distinct danger from what's going to happen in another 15 minutes from now.
Yeah.
But then you have the third act. Now, the third act is great visually, but for me, it dips too far down into M. Night Shyamalan territory, where now we're dealing with something that seems disconnected to me, but here's the connective tissue. But to me, the connective tissue doesn't really. It's either in true M. Night fashion, it's either A, predictable, or B, doesn't really matter. Mm-hmm. And so to me, the third act weighs the film down. Not only is the film now too long because the third act goes on way too long, but now we're dealing with a new set of circumstances, which is science fiction. And I know, Hooper, you're big on this too, on establishing the rules that the film lives in. And you have to stick to those rules. Now, the third act introduces a bunch of new things that are sort of hinted at before, but now they've come into play in a big way. And sort of, so the film becomes all about this new thing. And I'm trying to be very vague here, I'm sorry. But the point is, to me, the third act loses what was so great about the first two. And it becomes weighted down in one single set piece rather than a series of set pieces, like the second act was. And it loses, to me, I know this is going to be debatable because I'm sure a lot of people were probably in tears at this point, but for me it loses the emotion of it because I'm unclear how it works. And maybe that's me. Maybe I'm just an idiot.
No, it's not just you. I saw it a second time, and I was a little confused the first time. Then once I saw it again, it was like everything clicked and fell into place, and I understood what was going on a lot more.
Gotcha.
I understand where you're coming from on my first viewing because I was a little confused as well, and and about how it was all coming together, and the first time you're processing that, and you don't really have the sense to tackle what's going on emotionally. You're kind of still ingesting what's going on. But The second time, it was a lot more fluid to me.
Right. Okay. Well, that makes sense. So maybe it deserves a second viewing for me, and it's going to get one anyway. It's a Chris Nolan movie. I'll probably buy it, but I own all of his movies. But the fact is, for me, that third act drags. That third act goes on too long. That third act breaks the momentum that had been built up to that point. And so for me, when I walk out of the theater, I'm not thinking about the first two acts and how great they were. I'm thinking about the third act and how disappointing it was. And so for me, upon leaving the theater, it's more a disappointment than anything else. And and then that's as specific as I want to be without
Sure.
spoiling things about stuff, but essentially, it's that third act that gets me, and to me, the third act reminded me a little bit of Inception, where you've got all of these really cool things happening. I'm not sure how they happen. I'm not sure why they're happening, and there's a lot of exposition to explain it. But maybe on a repeat viewing, it's better.
Yeah, it made more sense to me.
Gotcha. So that's where I come from with it. I still stand by the statement that I believe it's his weakest film. It's definitely his biggest film. It's definitely the film that has had the most ambition from him. But for me, I think it's his weakest because it loses steam in the third act. And it doesn't have the benefit of having, Batman running around. So that's it. But Matthew McConaughey was brilliant in this, and Jessica Chastain,
I agree.
Everybody, just brilliant.
And Hathaway was really good.
Yeah.
Michael Caine was good. He was playing someone a little bit different.
He was, yeah.
So that's nice.
Michael Caine.
Michael Caine. Michael Caine.
Michael Caine. John, do you have more?
That's it for me.
Oh,
I think I've discussed everyone.
Dustin?
We discussed my Mr. Peabody and Sherman while you were away, Hooper.
Okay.
We did. I've got three, and then me and you share one, Hooper. So my number 6 is The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies. Now, the past 2 years, I believe this has been my number 1. And I'm going to drop it down to number 6, and here's why. In preparation for this, my girlfriend and I sat down and watched all the Lord of the Rings movies and then both of the Hobbit films. And
7 days later.
yeah, pretty much.
Gonna make a similar joke, yes.
2 months later, I come out of the coma and realize that the Hobbit films definitely are inferior, and I've always known that, but just how inferior, it doesn't become that obvious until you watch them all back to back. This movie is a really great ending to the franchise, a really great ending to The Hobbit. I think what happened here with the end is that Peter Jackson got self-conscious because everyone made fun of all the endings of Return of the King. So he kept the ending on this one really short, and it felt a little bit abrupt. But at the same time, what do? I mean, you know where it's going to go. And then the question is, how much connection do you have to Lord of the Rings from the end of this film? And so the end feels a little abrupt. And like it maybe could have used another scene or two of character building for Bilbo. But by and large, this is a very entertaining film, and it's a movie that I love. And I know people hate these movies, and I know people compare them to the Star Wars prequels. Now, that I don't understand. The Star Wars prequels are unwatchable. These movies have some really, obvious visual effects, and they have some issues in terms of, just different choices that Peter Jackson makes that I'm sure people don't agree with. But the fact is, these movies have such a great story, and they are interesting. And sure, maybe The Hobbit, maybe Bilbo loses some of his character moments because they've added a lot of other things to them. Or maybe it's not necessarily that Bilbo loses the moments, but just that there are other moments too. Whereas if you read the book, it's just about Bilbo. But to me, Bilbo's arc is still there, and the journey is still there. And to watch Bilbo and Thorin get to the point they get to in this film, and watch the movie kind of play out, I think is very satisfying. Now, it's number 6 because I don't agree with every choice that Peter Jackson made. And Well, I do think it's a really great film. I think there were just a few films that were better than this film. Not necessarily in the story department, because I love the story of The Hobbit, but maybe just in terms of execution and in the technical aspects of the film. So that's sort of what keeps it from number 6. Now that I say it out loud, I feel like it should be higher, but whatever. Who cares? So The Hobbit, The Battle of Five Armies, really good movie and a solid ending to the franchise, a solid ending to The Hobbit. Yes. Number 5 is Whiplash, which stars Miles Teller as a college student who is a very talented musician, a very talented drummer, and he wants to be tutored and mentored by J.K. Simmons' character, who is the biggest, baddest band director out there. And J.K. Simmons is a foul-mouthed, just loose cannon of a jerk to this guy. And what the film is really about to me is how far some people go to reach perfection or to master their craft. And it's sort of an examination of whether or not that's appropriate or necessary. And what I kind of gathered from the film may be different from what other people gathered from the film, but never before has a film ended the way that this has, to me. This ends like, okay, so it ends, you've got like, the drumming going on, right? So your heart's going, it's upbeat, they're building this tension, and then all of a sudden, like any good orchestra, they cut out, right? And so they cut to the credit roll, and you're just like, you're still hyped up, you know what I mean? It sticks the landing in a really cool way, and then emotionally it sticks that landing, because I don't think it's a spoiler to say that throughout the film, Miles Teller is the protagonist, J.K. Simmons is the antagonist, constantly pushing Miles to be better and being a jerk about it the whole way. And the end, you see that, this is Miles Teller's sort of chance to kind of push back a little bit. So you're already hyped up, and it's just a really, really great ending. And when it ends, I mean, you realize that you haven't breathed in a minute. You know what I mean? It's one of those kind of movies. Mm-hmm. And really, really great film. And I think if J.K. Simmons doesn't get nominated for this performance, it's a shame.
Yeah, I wanted to check this one out. I'm sad I didn't get to see it.
It's really good. And it's really fun to close your eyes and just imagine that he's yelling at Peter Parker.
Or the red M&M.
Right, or the red, yeah.
Or someone who didn't buy Farmer's Car and Truck.
Yes, exactly. or like Korra from The Legend of Korra. So, yes, that's Whiplash. A very, very solid film. It's a little hard to watch just in terms of, I don't know, my reaction to this was kind of like if I'm talking to Miles Teller, I'd be like, dude, just give up. Like, this is ridiculous what you're doing. Like, you're making yourself bleed because you're drumming too hard. Like, dude, chill. It's a drum set. Like, anyway. Number 3 is 22 Jump Street, which I freaking love this movie. There's no getting around it. I listened to your review, Hooper, and I will say I agree with a lot of your points. But I just love this film. Phil Lord and Christopher Miller are hitting it out of the park for me. And so 2 and 3 on my list are both their films. And
I love this one too.
I mean, it's so funny. I have not laughed that hard in a theater ever. I was so invested in this and in every part of it. I know one of the things Hooper and was it Sam did that review?
Yeah.
That one of the things y'all talked about was that that maybe you weren't as invested in the characters as they kind of thought you might be. So some of the character growth didn't really float your boat.
It was character regression, in my opinion. It was Schmidt all of a sudden being insanely codependent, whereas he was pretty independent in the first movie and a good cop. And I appreciated the growth that they showed in Janko.
Is Schmidt Channing Tatum?
In the Channing Tatum character.
Mm-hmm. Which one is which?
Janko's
is Channing Tatum, and Schmidt is
okay.
Hill.
I forgot their names.
Janko showed growth as a police officer and as like a person in this movie, but Schmidt had like a regression that it hit a pet peeve of mine. It was more like all of a sudden he's really codependent and can't be by himself, whereas he had no trouble with that, and that's sort of how he operated in the first movie. And I just kind of had a problem with the inconsistency there.
I almost saw that as sort of the point in terms of building their relationship, that perhaps, or their bromance, if you will, that perhaps that he did need him more than he thought he did. Mm-hmm. And especially going to college and being in a new sort of environment that he's uncomfortable with. I feel like maybe, because he's not the cool kid in college like he was in high school, at least in the first film or whatever. So maybe that's what it is. I don't know. I didn't have a problem with that, but I was very invested in their relationship. So the growth that I saw there was great. Ice Cube, for some reason, cracked me up more than he had any right to in this film.
Yeah, he was funny.
Especially his little tirade after he sees his daughter with Jonah Hill is just, I don't know.
How do you know this person?
Yeah, I don't. Dude, that just cracked me up. It just, there's a lot of really good moments in this film, a lot of funny stuff, and subversive kind of referencing what Hollywood has become. That's the whole point of the Nick Offerman character. Yeah. And that kind of stuff I love. They reference White House Down, I believe, at one point.
The end credits were great too. There was
the end credits are great. I mean, it's all just so funny and so true to character for me. I thought, and true also to kind of what college is, at least for a lot of people. And I enjoyed it a lot and had a good time with it. And so that's my number 3 pick. Just because of rewatchability and initial impression of walking out of that theater going like, my stomach hurts. I laughed too much.
This and Neighbors were just on the cusp of my top 10.
Is that right?
Yeah. I probably should have ranked this higher now that I think about it, because I didn't dislike the movie. I had problems with it, but I think that overall it probably deserved to be higher for me than it was. I disagree with Neighbors, which I didn't really find that good.
I like Neighbors,
but yeah, I did enjoy 22 Jump Street a lot. In fact,
yeah, it's a good movie. It's fun, and it has some good action set pieces in it too, and I enjoyed it.
I'm more looking forward to 23 when they inevitably make it, because the format will change, I hope.
Yes.
Because I explained it in me and Sam's review. I'd said if the format doesn't change, it will fall apart.
Yes. Well, now you've heard though that in the Sony leaks, they leaked what they're thinking about doing for the next one.
Well,
right?
what Amy Pascal and Jonah Hill want to do. I think that would be really beautiful and clean. That's what Jonah Hill said to Amy Pascal.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's what he said. Their idea was the Men in Black crossover, right?
Yes, Men in Black crossover.
Which would be funny, but what he said was, I think that'd be really beautiful and clean.
I don't know what he means by that.
Yeah, me neither, but it's... I wouldn't mind that.
Yeah, well, I think it'd be really goofy, but, I don't know. I think
it needs to get a little goofier. Like, they've established a good comedic route in the buddy cop genre, but now they need to take it bigger.
Here's my only thought about that. I always thought if they remade Men in Black, I think a cool way to do it would be to or rebooted it or whatever, would be to keep the comedy but push the darkness.
Oh yeah.
Like I don't know if that makes any sense, but like have this weird juxtaposition of like the comedic, sensibility of like Jay's character or whatever, but then like have, the villains actually be really scary and like kind of dark and noirish in a way. I think would be really cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's 22 Jump Street. I enjoyed it. And then my number 1 was, what number was it for you, Hooper?
7.
7? Okay. My number 1 was Lone Survivor. Why don't you start us off, Hooper?
Lone Survivor was a January release, in 2014. It's barely a 2014 film, but it's
just barely.
But it was released in a dump month, and it's one of those little gems that you find in January where it's a really solid film about about four. Are they Marines?
Wait,
I believe they're SEALs, aren't they? Aren't they Navy SEALs?
I think they're SEAls. Yeah, I was going to say.
And this is a true story, by the way, on a mission to, I believe, assassinate somebody. A lot of things go wrong between them being found out by villagers and then comms going down.
A true story, correct?
And then
Very true story,
and the Taliban showing up, and it's just essentially, it's a really well-directed film with some of the best tension and realistic gunfighter I've seen, which is essentially no music. Really, I think they were nominated for an Academy Award, I believe, for sound design.
They were,
and they really deserve it because the sound design is incredible. And they really ratchet up the tension because you don't see who's shooting at you. Like, that's what I imagine real, that's what a real firefight is like in their sort of situation. So it's a real solid film. It's one of those, I ranked it lower because, I don't know, just by the end you're like, that was good, but it was hard for me to rank in terms of numbers.
Sure.
It was way better than I expected, and it's one of those where, the middle of the movie is more exciting than the end, but when you're following the structure of a true story, if you want to stick true to the story, sometimes the action, fluctuates where it wouldn't normally in a 3-act story.
Right.
Normally.
Right.
So,
great
film. Fantastic film.
I would agree with that. So here's my thought on it is that, like you said, some great sound design, really, really awesome gunfire sequences. And what it does for me, is show, first of all, a believable brotherhood between these men. And then they all kind of get a good heroic moment in here. It's a bunch of people that I really like. You got Taylor Kitsch, Emile Hirsch, Ben Foster, and Mark Wahlberg. It's a very solid film, performance-wise. It's challenging to me because I look at it and say, if you're in that situation, how do you keep going? Like, what's your
motivation?
Yeah, exactly. And it's so tense and so taut, and the heroism of these men in this situation is just ridiculously amazing. It is a true story. The film is called Lone Survivor, so you kind of get an idea how it's going to end just from the title. And I know a lot of people don't like that title. I don't have necessarily a problem with it, but yeah, I mean, look, the thing is, it's a Peter Berg film that stars Taylor Kitsch and has explosions in the sky do the soundtrack. I mean, it's hitting the right nerve for my Friday Night Lights withdrawals. And by the way, Taylor Kitsch is hilarious, and why that guy's not in more comedies, I don't know, because he's hilarious.
He did a comedy. It was called X-Men Origins.
Oh, correct. That is true.
I remember. Side note, real quick. I remember when that came out, and I was like, "Oh, cool!
Yes.
Tim Riggins is in this. He's going to be good." And he was the only part that I even remember or liked, even though he wasn't really Gambit. But it was like, at least you're in a movie, and I like seeing you.
Yeah. And that was still while he was Tim Riggins.
Yeah.
It was in between Riggins.
Yeah. Riggins went to prison.
Hiatus Riggins. He... spoiler, whatever. It's been out long enough.
Yeah, it's been on for years.
But yeah, no, it's this to me, it's just a really, really awesome, challenging film, and one of the best examples of brotherhood and heroism that I can find in a movie recently. And it's so tense too because so the film starts, right, and they're up on this mountain and they're hiding under these trees as people are walking by. Now, they don't know, and I don't know if these men are Taliban, if they are, just passersby, like, who knows? And then they have this, the inciting incident here is a decision, right? It's not even something that's like thrust on them or anything. It's a decision that you have to make, which is sort of a lose-lose no matter how you make the situation, or no matter what choice you make, which is, do we let this kid go or do we not let this kid go? And
well, not even this kid. Like, it's a group of like goat herders, and one of them in particular is mean mugging them hard.
Yeah, true.
He's glaring at them like, I fucking hate you. Like, look, and they're like, look at him. Like, look at this guy. He hates us. Like, what do we do?
Exactly. And so not only are we seeing like the way that America's coming across to other people, but we're also seeing that they're put in a situation that I don't know that anybody could really handle. Do you kill these people because they may be a threat, or do you let them go and hope that they're not a threat? You know what I mean? Like, that's the thing. And then of course they end up in the worst firefight ever, of their lives, and probably the most tense firefight I've ever seen on film. Probably.
Yeah.
I know Saving Private Ryan's pretty legit too.
Yeah, but I mean, this is a movie that, like, it's like Dustin said. It's interesting that you see the cost of doing the right thing. The right thing is essentially we let them. They weigh the options. We could kill them and hide their bodies, which they'll find their bodies, but at least
eventually,
but at least
we
be
keep
gone
moving for now.
Do we take them with us? In which case, we slow us down, or do we let them go and then run and whatever and
hope we can make it out?
They decide, they're all like, oh, we could shoot them, but it's like, no, like, we'll end up on the news, like, and then the whole this looks bad on paper,
everything.
just on all of us. And so they decide, the right thing, and at least two of them say we should just kill them, and then they end up saying, the commander is essentially saying, no, like, we're going to keep going, we're letting them go, and we're getting out of here, we're aborting the op, and we're going, which is the right thing to do. And it's one of those where it's like, it sucks that the right thing brings the hardest consequences, but because you can see on that guy's face the whole time, the whole reason that scene is tense is because you're looking at this one kid who essentially, without saying it, is going, as soon as you let me go, I'm radioing the Taliban. I'm telling them you're here and you're all going to die and get your heads cut off. And they're like, all right, we still got to let him go,
Exactly.
And it's just, it's good.
And there's those scenes too where they're tumbling down the hills, you know what I'm saying? Like hitting their heads on rocks and all this stuff. Like, that's intense junk, you know what I'm talking? It's scary, it really is scary. And I enjoyed this movie a whole heck of a lot, and it stayed with me days after watching it. So for that reason, it's my number one pick of the year.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that was it for the favorites of 2014. Stay tuned for our worst ofs and looking forward into 2015. But for now, guys, thanks for participating.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Woo. All right. Goodbye, everybody.